The Persephone Foundation Timeline Archives. Timeline number 001. Charlie Don't Surf. The point of divergence is 1975, when Nixon and his goons are a bit more careful and what we know as the Watergate scandal never happens. When the North Vietnamese attack South Vietnam, Nixon sends the U.S. Air Force to bomb the North Vietnamese armies, which retreat back across the border. Nixon asks the Chinese to keep the North Vietnamese on a leash, and no further attempts are made before the South Vietnamese, with Western economic support, actually manage to get their act together. The repercussions are widespread. While the United States is still bitter about its Vietnam experience, the idea that aid short of boots on the ground to anti-communist groups is viable spreads. Greater American aid helps the anti-communists triumph in newly independent Mozambique and Angola. The Lebanese civil war grinds to a stalemate, and perhaps most importantly, the Iranian Revolution is stopped when American helicopters move in on the Shah's side. President Ford manages to cobble together a Cairo-Jerusalem-Tehran alliance in the Middle East after the failed Iranian revolt. The Soviet Union, having invaded Afghanistan earlier thanks to increased confidence that a superpower could easily win a guerrilla war and more desperation to appear powerful, also left the country earlier when it became clear that the war was lost. By 2012, the world is familiar yet different in many respects. In China, less reform-minded people took control, and the economic miracle we see in our history doesn't happen. China still liberalizes and is somewhat friendly with the United States, but it's much poorer and less open than our China. The Soviet Union suffered from a brief civil war that saw the Baltic states leave and the military take control. By 2012, the Soviet Union is a repressive military dictatorship, but it has relinquished its claims to Eastern Europe and is slowly beginning to approach the United States. Similarly, South Africa remains under apartheid. But this system is being challenged by growing unrest. India is more closely tied to the Soviet Union, with Pakistan more confident that it could receive American aid. It has its own sphere of influence poised to challenge the American-led SEATO. Europe still unifies after the fall of the Eastern Bloc, but under a more economically minded European community. American troops have been slowly pulling out of the Baltics after a series of agreements with the Soviets. Points of interest. Mexico is still dealing with violent drug warfare, but the U.S. is lending more direct support. In Argentina, the military wasn't marginalized by defeat, so the country stays somewhat to the right even after democratization. In Europe, worries about economic disparity and greater international skepticism about a unified Germany has slowed down the process, and the Baltic states managed to break away from the Soviet Union before the military reasserted control. The Soviet Union itself is a crappy military dictatorship that's backed down from superpower duties. In the Middle East, Lebanon is still divided between the Syrians and Israelis. Nobody knows how much longer this situation can last. And Saddam Hussein is worried that the U.S. and its friends will attack any day now. Afghanistan is a shaky pseudo-democracy fought over by Islamists, moderates, and the military. No socialists allowed after the Soviet invasion. Somalia managed to get out of the war with Ethiopia intact with American foreign aid. The Congo suffered from a war in the 90s and 2000s, with pro-Chinese pseudo-socialists taking over. There are no jokes about Rhodesian currency, but the whites still have a monopoly on the government. In China, less reform-minded people took over after Mao kicked the bucket. The economy hasn't liberalized as much, but it has. Even the PRC has abandoned the North Koreans after their failed attempts to detonate a nuclear weapon. North Vietnam is still angry with the Chinese and South Vietnamese, but there are rumors of opening relations with the West. This has been a Persephone Foundation Timeline Reading. Thank you for listening.